Child of Alara Gates is a classic deck that traditionally tried to dirtle its way to a Maze's End win. And in recent years, it's much faster and far more consistent. I'm going to approach this deck as a Miku Child of Song deck because I'm a huge fan of the reskin. However, you can build it with whichever artwork you want. It's still going to be a blast to play. Let's dive into this and see just how fun this deck can actually be. Wizards of the Coast had to have anticipated that players would be building a Miku Child of Song deck because there's some key pieces that are absolute fire in this deck that have the Miku artwork. And I didn't add them just because they had Miku. This deck was created for efficiency. I'd like to start by talking about one of the strongest cards in the deck. Song of Creation is one of those cards where you want to make it work, but it seems like every time you play test it, it falls short of whatever it is you're trying to do. In Child of Alara, this is one of the strongest cards in the deck, allowing you to play several cards in a turn and prepare for recursion. We want to play lands, draw cards, and board wipe strategically. I think the average player recognizes that Miku or Child of Alara can destroy your opponent's threats. However, it's important to remember what else she can do. Destroy Song of Creation before the end of your turn and you won't have to discard any cards. That being said, I've often found myself choosing to keep it on the battlefield and discard my hand simply because it's so efficient and we are recurring from the graveyard throughout the game. We can win with an army of zombies, a giant creature, or even by collecting all the gates. But the most important thing we need to do before anything happens is get non-basic lands into play. Cards like Joint Exploration and Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, both allow us to land trip. That is, draw a card and then get an additional land onto the battlefield. One of the reasons Child of Alara Gates has become more efficient in recent years is because we as players have more land trips to choose from. But none shine quite as brightly as Spelunking, an enchantment with an added effect that all lands you control come into play untapped, gates and caves included. I think it's about time we discover what these lands have to offer. The Wooburg cycle of hidden caves can be sacrificed in order to discover 4. This means an empty hand is not necessarily a reason to fret. With a little help from our graveyard, Sunken Palace can double up any spell we cast or ability we activate. Forgotten Monument allows you to tap your caves as if they were a city of brass, paying 1 life to add a mana of any color. And finally, we have Urza's Cave, which touches upon the next subject I wanted to cover in this video: outright tutoring for non-basic lands. Modern Horizons 3 gave us quite the cheeky piece with White of the Reliquary. This allows us to tap, sacrifice another creature, and search for any land in the deck. There's a specific synergy here with Field of the Dead in that you can sacrifice a zombie, search for a land, and when that land comes into play, you create another zombie. The same set also gave us Sowing Mycospawn, a creature that can be kicked in order to exile target land. It ETBs and fetches us a land of our choice. Wasteland is just one threat to our Maze's End that Sowing Mycospawn helps prevent. Mycospawn is pseudo Reapinso on a stick, another card I strongly suggest including in your build. Navigation Orb is kind of like Expedition Map and Kodama's Reach packed into one specifically for gates. Archdruid's Charm does some serious work as well, allowing you to search for a land at instant speed or helping you remove artifacts and enchantments that your commander otherwise wouldn't be able to exile. Speaking of using Miku's abilities, I think it's about time we examine the most efficient way to sacrifice our commander. We're going to be blowing up the board after all, and while our lands will be fine, we want to make sure our opponents have a pretty tough time answering our threat. Rather than activate abilities or cast spells that cause us to sacrifice Miku, we want sacrificing Miku to be a part of the cost. Attempting to exile Miku won't do our opponents any good, and countering a spell will be far too late because her ability will already be on the stack. It just so happens there's a small handful of lands that allow us to sacrifice creatures as a cost for their effect. You want to put as many of these as you can in the deck. Momentous Fall is a great example of a spell that requires you to sacrifice a creature as a cost rather than as a result of casting the spell. A large part of our deck is dedicated to getting more lands into play, so the second we destroy the field and draw 6 cards, our opponents are in deep trouble because we are building pretty fast at that point. Greater Good is a bit of an exception to the cost versus cast rule, but it accomplishes something very similar to Momentous Fall and can even be paired with graveyard shenanigans to intentionally discard lands in order to later recur them in the game. Cards like Lumra, Aftermath Analyst, and Blossoming Tortoise all do us the favor of milling cards prior to helping us return them right back onto the battlefield. I'm not saying our hand is less important than our graveyard, but rather the graveyard is just a separate strategy. We actually want our hand to be pretty well stocked because this deck loves creatures that allow us to play additional lands per turn. Yeah, we'll blow them up, but there's always more to put right back onto the battlefield, and if we can get multiple non-basic lands down a turn, that's just chef's kiss. We're looking at a lot of the classics here. AC, Tatiova, Oracle of Moldiah. Bloomburrow's Glarb, Calamity's Augur seems to mesh well with everything we've got going on in the deck. Not only does it let us play lands from the top of our library, but we can surveil sneaking lands directly into our graveyard. It has the best of both worlds. You're going to notice as you pilot this deck that your opponents are very concerned with the number of gates you have, so you want plenty of spells that can catch them off guard. I suppose if your deck had a deepest, darkest secret, it would be that gate count is a lie. Reshape the Earth is pretty much an instant win if you have either an untapped Maze's End or Spelunking in play. Realistically, drawing cards and putting multiple lands into play per turn is usually pretty efficient at getting 10 gates into play. Most of the time I just search for Maze's End. At the time of this video, there are 24 gate cards in Magic the Gathering. If you think there's 23, you're wrong, because Planar Nexus is every land type. So it's both a cave and a gate. Thespian Stage and Replication Technique both serve as ways to copy lands that you already have in play. Speaking of lands, not everything is a cave or a gate. The World Tree is essential for mana fixing. After all, our commander is Wooburg, and we want to make sure that we can get her down as fast as possible. Deserted Temple is another way of untapping a land that's come into play tapped, or using the ability of a land twice in a single turn. Speaking of untapping lands, I don't think I've ever regretted drawing a turnabout. It seems to always be the answer. Untapping all lands you control feels like taking an extra turn. The only thing that seems to be better than untapping lands is tapping lands in order to use Sage of the Maze's activated ability. Sage of the Maze's ability specifically states add 2 mana in any combination of colors, and you can tap a gate to untap Sage of the Maze. This effectively doubles your mana and turns it into mana of any color. Since this deck has a zombie sub-theme, I thought it would be fun to add the Necrobloom. It's just another way to get zombies onto the battlefield every time a land comes into play. It's time to sum everything up. My build runs 22 creatures, 13 sorceries, 9 instants, 3 artifacts, 4 enchantments, and a whopping 48 lands. No, that is not too much, it is just right. This is the first deck tech video I've ever made, so I highly appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Who knows what I'll be coming out with in the future. I'm hoping to save up for better audio equipment as well. Thank you so much for watching my video, it really means a lot, and have fun out there.